Hey party people, we're back with another video, and this one is a special one because we have to celebrate hitting 1,000 subscribers, actually way more than that at this point. Probably it's moving pretty fast, and I want to thank you all for, supporting me the way that you did, because when I started out a couple months ago, I would have never thought this to be possible, not in a million years, and certainly not just in a couple months. So thank you so much. Thank you for putting your trust in me. I'll try and improve with every video that I've put out. I've said this before, I'll say it again. This is my goal, and let's just enjoy the journey, and I hope that you will also like what I'm bringing to you today, because the results of our poll are in, and Stratholme has won. Teldrassil came in second, trailed by Karazhan. For those of you who voted otherwise, don't worry, I hear you, and I will be sure to cover all the options of the poll eventually. With that being said, let's move on to the topic of today's video, Stratholme. But I don't just want to do a walkthrough as I used to do with the Old Scarlet Monastery video. I want to provide some kind of value that goes above loading into a 0.5.3 client and just walking through the area with some light commentary. So I thought about the topic for a while, and something stood out. While Stratholme itself already holds some surprises in the alpha version, there is a greater mystery at play here. This zone, just north of Stratholme. What is it? Well, you can reach it by clipping through the dungeon portal next to Baron Rivendar's slaughterhouse on some WoW versions. If you do that, you will enter a zone called Quel'Thalas. So it's solved, right? Nope, not so fast. But we'll get into that at a later point in the video. First, let's take a look at Stratholme, because that's what you all came here for. What changed from the early days of WoW, the 0.5.3 alpha in 2003, all the way to 1.12? I've walked through the dungeon on both clients, and I'll give you some side-by-side comparisons. The first thing that stands out, obviously, is there is a lot less fire going on in the alpha version. It's probably safe to assume this was something they were going to add later, considering they were probably still messing around with particle effects. Something you can clearly see if you happen to walk into fire on the alpha version, with a much different effect compared to what we got later. Now, imagine this times 40 in Molten Core on a 2003 PC. So, perhaps they were still trying to find a performance-friendly way of lighting Stratholme on fire the way they did in the 1.12 version. With that being said, let's just get into the alpha exploration, and the first thing I noticed coming in from the living side is that you can't yet interact with the gate that connects it to the festival lane, and the fastest way to get to Undead side if you enter through living obviously would have been through that gate, so you can't interact with that yet. Other than that, as I said, no fire whatsoever, gives it a little bit more of a grim look, you could say. And this is the square where you can find School, the rare mob, as well as the tobacco for the quest from Light's Hope Chapel. And as you can see here, there's no well here yet. This is something recurring in this zone. The 3 wells that are in total, I think, are all still missing. There are no models for them yet. We will see that at 2 other points in the video. This here is one of the 2 places in the dungeon where you actually get ambushed by insects and bugs, I think, or rats, depending. Which you can see here, this is obviously not functioning yet, and there are no gates on top either. So now, while Stratholme is one dungeon, generally it's divided in 2 parts, which is living and undead, and this is what the way towards living would have looked like in this version. And as you can see, there is no way, it just ends in a dead end, pretty much, and there is no living quarter, or is there? Well, certainly not in this part of the dungeon, that much is for sure, but as you can see, I'm bringing up the map, and there's like a suspicious red dot in the eastern part of the zone actually, so you will see shortly what that actually is. And keen eyes will have spotted the green landmass to the north of Stratholme on this map, which is something that we will be returning to after this exploration section of the video. Now you can see here we're just walking towards Festival Lane, and this is where you would encounter the Unforgiven. The way behind is gated off as we are used to it being. This is a look at the missing fountain in Festival Lane, but much more interestingly than that, you can see back here there's something very, very curious, and no, it is not Orius' little chapel, it is indeed the Scarlet Stronghold from the living side of the dungeon in all its magnificence. somewhere completely different. This is obviously to the right, where you would enter through the service entrance if you do have the key to the city and you just wanted to do a quick undead run. This would be the entrance. Obviously, you can see here it's missing, and we're going to be taking a look at what is probably the heart of this video, apart from my wild theories that are coming up, which is the Scarlet Citadel in a completely different look. So let's take a look at that, shall we? And the first thing you'll notice as we walk in, obviously, is there are no textures, so it's a bit confusing as to where you can and can't go, obviously, which is also why I, zoomed out a little bit so you can at least see my character, so your eye has something to focus on in here. It is somewhat confusing, although, there are basically two ways you can enter this building. It's forking off to the left and to the right, and whichever way you go, you will shortly end up faced with a stairwell. But before we get to that one, we're just checking out all the small little rooms, nooks and crannies a little bit here. So as you can see, the layout is quite a bit different to what we got in the live game. And mind you, the layout of what we got in the live game is quite similar to, a lot of the hallways in Scarlet Monastery, Library, and Armory, I believe. So there was a lot of stuff that's just been reused, I think, whereas this looks very much like an original concept, an original model, which very sad that we didn't actually get that one. So you can see here, this would have probably been a window that I was jumping on, just checking the other side, whether, you can get through there or not. So I'm suspecting these would have been windows probably. And this is the stairway that I talked about. It forks off to the left and to the right once again. So you have two paths you can take. However, whichever path you do take, you will end up in the same place, which is a fairly large room that probably would have housed the final boss, if you will. Although, mind you, we're still not sure if this is going to be a dungeon or not at this stage in development, right? This might very well still be an outside elite area. So that's maybe even more interesting on that note, but you can clearly see the design here. Looks like it might be intended for a high-level PvE encounter of sorts. Furthermore, there's a door here that doesn't actually lead anywhere. It's still blocked off. So maybe this is entirely unfinished, even in the sense that there would have been some more geometry added to this building. But yeah, this is the Scarlet Citadel in the service entrance. And we're going to be taking a look at the rest of the dungeon now. So this is obviously where you are walking towards Baron Rivendare's slaughterhouse. Off to the left, we're used to be seeing a gate, but there's no gate here. There's just a, dark pit of despair that we better not want to fall into, because going out of bounds in video games actually creeps me out a little bit. The more you know, I should have probably found a different topic to make videos about, because with the amount of times that I end up falling through the world and just glitching out, I do get the creeps quite a lot. So yeah, you can see here, this is the undead side, and honestly, what I didn't mention yet, I suppose, is that there are no signs on the buildings yet. So this is something that they added later on in the level design. And also, the cigarettes are completely empty. So they didn't model the inside yet. And I'm not going to lie to you, a lot of the undead part is exactly as you would expect it to be. So let me just fast forward for you a little bit. All right, well, with that, we're getting to the more interesting parts of the undead area, because yes, even this part of Stratholme does hold a surprise or two, which you will see in a second as I'm just showing off a little bit of the area around the slaughterhouse where you would find all the abominations in the 1.12 version. And you know what? I kind of dig this vibe without the fires that have been burning for 10 years at this point in the story or whatever. It's very dramatic, it's very fantasy-esque, but I also kind of like the vibe without the fires, to be honest. Maybe some smoldering here or there would have been cool, but, they did really set Stratholme on fire in the 1.12 version. And here is the gate that I mentioned leading into this video during the intro. Obviously, there is no gate in the alpha version, but what lies beyond it is also fairly curious, and it is exactly the same thing that you're going to be able to find on a private server version of, let's say, Wrath or TBC if you do manage to come through here, and that is Ziggurat and Naxxramas. That's right. It seems like a little bit of a small model of Naxxramas, and obviously it's not textured whatsoever, but it's been in the game since 2003 and perhaps even longer, which I think is quite interesting. Now, with that being said, this is Naxxramas. We've seen it before. This is the teleporter to Naxxramas, but what else is there? Well, let me show you. So this is the alpha world map that's used, and you can see here it's not the same as the drawn one we got. It is instead representing the terrain in each area, and you can see north of Stratholme there is a interesting green area, which you might say is signifying Quel'Thalas, right? Well, the weird thing is there is a distinctly different greenish landmass to the southeast of that, which may as well also be Quel'Thalas. So considering that we see this on the map, that also means that it should be in the game. Because as I said, it's representing the terrain that's found in the world on the world map. So that's why I'm thinking there might be something there. And there is indeed a way to sort of get close to that. First off, let me just make sure I put a big fat disclaimer on what I'm about to say here. This is very clearly just a theory. Please don't get mad at me in the comments. I'm just trying to offer an alternative viewpoint here for which there is some circumstantial evidence. Not more, not less. If you dig around YouTube, you will find a couple of examples of people glitching through the Naxxramas raid portal and getting to an area labeled Quel'Thalas. As much I've already stated in the intro. But I'd wager that the name of the zone was changed to Quel'Thalas later, past the alpha or even beta stages. So I think the zone we are seeing on this map is not in fact Quel'Thalas. I think Stratholme was designed to be its own non-instant area, and as such, the zone we are seeing here is just Stratholme. It's not Northern Lordaeron or anything fancy. It's also not Quel'Thalas. The alpha client uses a replica of the dark portal to signify planned dungeon entrances and the like, and while some areas in the game world are already instanced on the 0.5.3 client, Stratholme is not. Those that aren't yet instanced, but were going to be at a later date, such as Scholomance, got a dark portal to signify that there is going to be a dungeon at one point. By the way, another example for a zone later changed to be instant would be Sulfuric on the alpha client, with mobs even being present inside the non-instanced dungeon zone. Some things originally designed not to be instanced are still not. We can imagine Stratholme in this version as a sort of hinterlands elite area, a huge outdoor elite zone. With how big Yintha Allure is and how much of a chore it can be to clear it, it may as well have been its own instance, considering the scale. The reason for this archaic, non-instance design is, of course, that WoW took a lot of inspiration from EverQuest in its early days, and in classic EverQuest, every raid boss is also a world boss, because they simply don't have any instance zones. So while the Wowpedia is adamant this zone might be Northern Lordaeron, I beg to differ. I think it is simply a result of the way the map was set up, and furthermore, I am almost certain that at the stage of the WoW Alpha, the area directly north of Stratholme was never supposed to be Quel'Thalas, but something else. Why do I think that? Have a look at these maps. One of them shows Alexstrasza's name marked north of Lordaeron and west of Quel'Thalas. Another one of those early game maps that still had the game's max level set at 70 shows the level 70 area called the Dragon Isles directly north of Lordaeron. Dragon Isles sounds familiar, right? Yup. And since the Dragon Isles are very clearly marked west of Quel'Thalas, I don't think this zone could be Quel'Thalas. I think it is a remnant from a time when Stratholme was its own zone. This is further corroborated by the fact that, firstly, if you look at the WoW Alpha flight path map, there is an area the color of jade directly north of where Stratholme would have been. This area is obviously supposed to be the Dragon Isles, in my opinion. Now, take a good look at the textures on the flight map. Because if we go over to the Designer Island on the Alpha client, we are presented with a large array of different terrain types and textures. One of those areas holds a lush green zone with trees and something that might be Orc Towers, or Troll Towers maybe. It's the same green used on the flight path map to very clearly mark Quel'Thalas, east of Stratholme, and to the northwest, a suspicious jade-like green. Now, I've done some snooping around the Alpha client and went for a little bit of a swim. If you swim directly north of Stratholme, you find a very glitchy but interesting landmass using a texture I have never seen anywhere else. It's the color of jade, about the same found on the flight path map and on the very rough Alpha overworld map as well. Now, this is just a theory, obviously, and I'm mainly going off a hunch here, but I would like to propose that what we are standing on right now is not, in fact, Quel'Thalas, but the very first trace of the Dragon Isles in World of Warcraft, circa 2003. The whole thing gets even more confusing though. If you go for that very same swim on the 1.12 client, you will make it to a High Elven lighthouse, which very clearly signifies Quel'Thalas, but now look at this. The terrain structure on this island is similar to what the lighthouse layout looks like on the 1.12 version, but it is in a different place. So there's obviously no telling what exactly this thing would have been used for during the alpha days, but it's safe to assume this pillar of rock in the ocean was eventually properly textured, had some assets added, and was then moved to the northern coastline of Lordaeron, where it still stands today. Honestly, I couldn't say anything conclusively. What do you guys think though? Do you think I might be onto something here, considering all the various old maps showing the Dragon Isles in that location? Or do you think I just have too much time on my hands and finally lost my mind? After looking into this for as long as I have at this point, I honestly can't even tell anymore. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this attempt at both exploring the alpha version of Stratholme as well as taking a look at another forgotten WoW mystery. Even though we couldn't answer anything conclusively, the old maps are something I would love to go over at some point. For the moment though, I'm still trying to get my hands on that World of Warcraft diary. I think that's going to provide us with a lot of interesting content. Either way, thanks for sticking around for as long as you have, and I hope to see you again in the next one. Take care.